What's going on, everybody? James here from Artificial Entertainment, and today we're going to be kicking off the first video of the series showing how to be able to set up the entirety of the dynamic parkour tray system. And in this video, we're going to be focusing on mainly the initial setup as well as getting the vault and mantle actions in place. So let's go ahead and dive in. Alright, so I have here an Unreal Engine 5.1 third-person project. Now I have done a couple of modifications, such as swapping the UE5 mani to the UE4, just so I didn't have to do any retargeting during the animation stuff. And I gave him a simple walk cycle, blend space type of situation, and then just gave him a simple jump. So I haven't added anything other than just the ability to move the character, give him a jump, and I do also have the actual assets for the dynamic parkour trace system right here as well. So we're starting off pretty much, right from scratch. We're going to be going through everything step by step as much detail as I can. So let's go ahead and get this party started. So the first thing that we're going to do, because the system does work best with an Unreal Engine plugin, it's called motion warping. So we're going to want to enable this first. And we can do this by going up to edit here at the top and then clicking on plugins. And then in the search bar here, we're just going to type in motion warp. And you'll see motion warping right here. Now, if we go ahead and click on this, it's going to give you this little message telling you it's in beta. It's totally okay. Just click yes, and then it'll tell you need to restart your editor. So we're going to go ahead and do that and be right back. Alright, so now that we have motion warping enabled, we can close that. And now from here, we need to go into our character blueprint. So for me, that's going to be the third person, blueprints, BP third person character. And what we're going to do first is we're going to add the interface here because this is where all the execution events are going to be found. So we want to make sure this is added into the character. So to be able to do this, we can go up at the top here where the compile button is, go a little bit over to the right, and you're going to see class settings. Now, if we go over to the details panel here, go down a little bit towards the bottom, you're going to see implemented interfaces. We're going to want to click on add and type in DPTS, and you'll see DPTS underscore BPI. Which basically just stands for the Dynamic Parkour Trace Systems Blueprint Interface, just because acronyms. So we're going to add that in just by clicking on it, and then you'll see that under the My Blueprint section, Interfaces has been added with all of these events here now. So we now have all the events added into our character. However, we still need to add the components to make sure everything is going to work correctly. So we're going to go up to the components section, and this is where you can find the capsule component, the mesh, the camera, all that good stuff up here on the left side. We're just going to click on add, and we're going to search first for dynamic, and we're going to add the dynamic parkour tray system right here. And then we're also going to click on add again, and we're going to type in motion warping, or just motion, and then it'll pop up right here. And just click on this right here to add this one as well. Now, once you have both components added, we can go ahead and just compile, save. And now we're going to go ahead and add a new function because we're going to kind of create the connection between motion warping and the parkour trace system. So just, for those of you who don't know, essentially what motion warping does is allow you to be able to move an animation during that animation's runtime. However, to be able to move it, motion warping needs to be given locations. And that's kind of where my system comes in. It's one of the things that it does anyways, is provide locations for motion warping to be able to take place. So what we're going to do is create a quick function where we can feed these locations into. So we're going to go into functions here on the My Blueprint section, click on the little plus symbol, and then we're going to name this add or update warp targets. Now you can name this really whatever you want, like update locations or whatever. It's just kind of basically something that we're going to use to be able to get all of our motion warping information fed in. So now from here, we're going to go to the components tab, go to motion warping, click and drag into our graph here, and then we're going to pull off of the little input pin and type in add or update. And you'll see add or update warp target right here at the top. Now from here, we're just going to want to right click on the warp target pin here and then split the struct pin. This way we can get all this information here nice and handily. Now we do want to make sure we have a few of these, 4 to be exact. So the easiest way to do this is to just highlight these 2 here and then Control D to duplicate, hook these 2 up, and then hold shift, and then you can box select the missing pieces, or you can just kind of do them all at once either way. But have these both selected and then Control D again to get 2 more, and bam, now we got 4. Now we'll go ahead and just name these. So we're going to set this to warp 1, warp 2, warp 3, and warp 4. Now, these are just to kind of match the naming conventions that are inside of the parkour system, but once you get more familiar with things, you can name these however you want. So now we also need to set up a way to be able to get data into these for the warp target location and rotation. So we're going to click on the little purple execution node here for the function, go over into the details panel, and then add an input. Now we're just going to add one for the moment because we're going to change from this Boolean value by clicking on the drop down and then switch it to transform. Now once it's swapped to transform, we can add 3 more, and this way all of them will be transforms. So that's exactly what we want. Now from here, we're just going to name these exactly like we did for the warp target. So the first one's warp 1, second one's warp 2, warp 3 on the third one here, and then the last one is warp 4. Now, for all of these transforms here, we're going to want to right-click and split the struct pin. This way we can expose the rotation and location on all of these. We don't really need the scale, but we need the location and rotation for each point. And then from here, we can just plug in the corresponding location and rotation. So warp 1 location into warp 1, just like this, and then warp 2, warp 3, just hooking up the location and rotation to the ones, respective warp names. That's pretty much all I'm doing here. And now we have all of them hooked up. So now that we have this function set up, we're going to compile and save and go back to our event graph here. And what we're going to want to do is go to the interfaces section under the My Blueprint. Under primary events, you're going to see send warp locations. So this is the primary function that's sending over the actual locations for you to be able to use in motion warping. Hence why we make this function, because now we can click and drag that function in, and this way we can hook up the execution. And now you see here now why we did that naming convention, so that way we know exactly what's what, and all the naming conventions are just easier to be able to understand and correlate it to the way that it's named in the actual system component itself. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we need to kind of do some adjustments inside of the character here. So the first thing we're going to do is give it the initial reference that it's going to need to be able to get everything kind of going. So we're going to pull back the event begin play here, go and get a reference to the Parkour trace system by just pulling it into our graph, and we're going to pull off of it and set initial, and you're going to see primary function set initial references. So we're going to add this in, hook this up off event begin play. This way, as soon as the game starts, it's going to send the reference to the actual character. And we're going to pull off the character reference pin here and just type in self so we can get a reference to self. Now, the next thing we're going to do is mainly for the climbing. It doesn't really have any impact when it comes to the vaulting and mantling type of stuff, but this is technically part of the setup because climbing is part of the system. So we're going to go and get all this set up here as well. So we're going to take the location and rotation, the vectors here, we're going to take these and delete them out. So this way we still have the add movement input and scalar values, but we're going to change this up a little bit. So we're going to right click in any empty space in the graph, and we're going to type in adjust, and you're going to see adjust input direction under DPTS functions. So we're going to go ahead and just click on this to add it in, and we're going to put it right off of triggered and hook up the execution just like this. Now what we want to do though is we want to know that this one is left and this one is forward. So what we're going to do is take the X value, plug it into left and right, the Y value, plug it into forward and back. For the actor reference, we're going to pull off and get a reference to self. Let me pull this forward a little bit, give us a bit more room. And then for the DPTS ref, we're just going to drag a reference of our parkour system into our graph and hook it up just like this. Now from here, we can delete the current pins this way because we already know what's what. We've already got them hooked up, so we can go ahead and just delete this out. And then we'll take the left-right vector direction, plug that into the world direction, and then the scalar value as well. And same thing for forward and back, just like so. So this way we now have this input direction kind of adjusting some certain elements that are going to be needed for when you enter a climbing state. Now just to make it easy, we're going to grab a reference to the parkour system here and Control D just to duplicate it. And then we're going to pull off and we're going to type in movement, and you're going to see get movement input. And we're going to plug it in right at the end here, just like this. And then we're going to take the forward back scale value, plug it into forward back, and the left right scale value into left right. So this way we get the left right and forward back scale values being pushed into the system when it needs it. And that's pretty much the primary setup. We've got the adding of the warp target locations, we got the movement input adjustment, and we're setting the initial references on what our system and character are. So now from here is where we can start doing the fun stuff, which is actually adding the traversal actions. Now, one thing I just want to note for those of you who are just getting started in Unreal Engine, in order to be able to play a montage, which is what we're ultimately going to be using to trigger these, you do need to have something inside of your animation blueprint. So if I open up just to show you real quick, the tutorial assets, I have a tutorial ABP here. Now, if I go to my anim graph here, you're going to see that there is a default slot here. This base locomotion is just my ground locomotion and my jump here, so it's nothing really going on in there. But I just want to note that you do need this to be able to play a montage. If this is not in your anim graph, the montages will not trigger. So make sure to just, if you're going to use it, just pull off of your state machine and just go default slot, and you'll see slot, default slot right here. So just make sure that that's in there. I just want to make sure for those of you who are just starting off that you know that you do need to have that in there. So we'll go ahead and close this down, go back to the character blueprint, and we're going to start off with the vaulting actions. So we're going to go under the interfaces here, under my blueprint. We're going to go to the action events, and you'll see vault action right here. So we're going to double click, and this will add it into our graph. Now we're going to also right click and grab a play montage node, just like so. And then make sure to grab a mesh. Whoops, I need to just do that. Make sure to grab a mesh reference. So we see the mesh character mesh 0. Grab a reference to this by just pulling it into your graph and plug it into the in-skeletal mesh component. If you don't do this, the montage node will not play. Now, we don't have any montages yet, which is totally fine. We're just kind of getting the execution side of things set up here. So now the next thing we're going to do is pull off of the montage to play pin here, and we're going to get a switch node, or I'm sorry, a select node. So just type in select, and you'll see this right here. Now, the index will start off as a wildcard, but if we take this vault action type here, plug it in, you'll see that now that there's selections for short distance, long distance, and wall vaults. So what we're going to do is go ahead and just plug this into the play montage just like so. Pull these in a little tighter to make it look a little better. There we go. Perfect. So now we have everything we need to get started from here. Now we just need to start grabbing some animations. So we're going to go ahead and just minimize the character blueprint here. And I'm going to go to my content browser, and for me, all of my parkour animations are from this pack here. So I'm going to go into the parkour animations, UE4 skeleton, and then we're going to start with the vault actions. So I'm going to open up the vaults folder here, and the one I'm going to use is going to be the monkey vault. Now I do have a folder here for tutorial assets, so I'm going to go ahead and just take it and push it into the animations folder. So I'm going to click on the monkey vault and drag it into just the animations, and then I'm going to just copy it for right now. Now we also want to go ahead and get the kind of the longer vaults as well, so we're going to go into the wide section. And my personal favorite of these is the roll vault. So we're going to grab that one and put that into the animations folder as well, and just copy it there. And the last one that we're going to need is the wall vault. So we're going to go into the wall section of the vaults. So we're going to go vaults, wall vault, and then you'll see wall monkey vault. So grab that one and put that into animations as well and copy it right into that folder. So now that we have the animations, we're going to go to that folder here that we just put them all in, and we're going to click on one, shift click to get the last one, and we're going to right click, and we're going to go ahead and first just replace the skeleton. Now I've created just a copy of the UE4 skeleton, and I named it retarget skelly. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on this, click OK, and then we're going to go ahead and right click again, and we're going to go to asset actions. Now, depending on what version of Unreal Engine you're using, the wording of this might change. But essentially, we want to edit via the property matrix. I don't know I think it just says edit via property matrix, not bulk edit in 5.4. But essentially, we just want to get to this here. So now once this window pops up here, we're going to go under where it says root motion, under where we got the display here tab on the side. And we're going to make sure enable root motion is checked. Then we can just close this and save all. Now we're going to click on all these again by clicking on the first one, shift clicking on the last one, right click, and we're going to go ahead and create anim montage. Now I'm going to create a different folder for the montages, and I'm also going to create an overall folder for vault. So this way we can kind of put everything into respective folders, because by the time we get done with this series, there's going to be a lot of animations that we're going to be using. So we're going to take these and put these into montages, take these, put these into vault, and then I'm going to move the montages into the vault folder. So now from here, we're just going to open up the vault montages here, and we're going to start with the monkey vault. So this is kind of like the medium height vault montage. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the notifies, and we're going to add a notify track just to give us a couple of tracks to work with. And then we're going to right click, go to add notify state, and then click on motion warping. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take it and put it back to the beginning of the frame here. And we're going to look at right about where he would get to like the height of the object. Something about like right there. And then we're going to click and add a new notify track. And we're going to add another motion warping here. And we're going to look at for where he kind of does the vault off of the object. So actually it looks like I aligned that pretty well. And where he goes and kind of lands. So right about here. So we're going to put this window right about something like this. Now this is all going to depend on your animation. And just to give you a brief rundown as to how this works is that essentially what I'm doing is the motion warping windows define, okay, we're going to mark the point or the location where the actor is at the start point, and then we're going to move it over this window in this time to the desired location, which we're going to define here in a moment. But you can use multiple windows or multiple warps to be able to actually move your character in a few different ways, but you need to be able to have multiple locations. So this is why the system comes with 4 different warp points, because certain animations could be using 1 and other ones could be using all 4. So essentially the first one here is just kind of defining where he's going to get onto the object. So something right about there, then he's going to kind of, fling himself forward a little bit and then go forward, and then this is where we want it to land. So the first one here, we're going to name this under the details panel. We're going to go to the root motion controller, get the drop down here, and under warp target name, we're going to set this to warp 1. Now I'm going to go over the warp target names and stuff, so just follow along for right now, and then, you'll have more understanding as we go along. But for this last one here, we're going to set this to warp 3. Now we want to make sure on both of these that we have the ignore z-axes unchecked. So we want to make sure that that's on both of those here. And then from here, we can just go ahead and click on save. Now we're going to go ahead and go to the roll vault now, and we're going to set this one up now. So we're going to basically do the same thing, but we're going to use 3 warp points on this one rather than 2, and you'll see why in a moment. So we're going to go ahead to the notifies track, add a new track just like what we did before, and we're going to start at the beginning, right click, notify state, and add a motion warping window. Put it at the beginning of the animation, and we're going to look at right about where where his root bone gets onto the position. So something right about here. So we'll push this to right about there, and then we're going to add another motion warping window. But this time what we're going to do is we're going to put it right on top of where this one ends. So that way this one's going to go from here and then end here, and then this one's going to take over. So we're going to go ahead and look at right around where the roll ends and he falls off of whatever the quote unquote object that he's on, which is going to be right about there, I'd say. And we're going to put the window right there. And then we're going to go ahead and just right click one more time, add notify state, motion warping. And then we're going to look at where he lands, which is going to be right about there. And then we'll put the motion warping window endpoint there. And then we're just going to click on save. Now, I'm doing this because I want to show you guys what happens when you don't actually name things. As you can see here, if you ever don't name a warp window, it's going to tell you it doesn't specify a valid warp name. So if you ever don't name something and you see this is just telling you you need to specify something. So don't ever worry, don't ever think something's broken. It's just like a kind of a slight warning. But to be able to fix that, we're just going to click on each motion warping window here, starting with the first one. And this one's going to be warp 1. And we're going to uncheck the ignore z-axes. This one here is going to be warp 2. And we're going to uncheck the ignore z-axes. And this one here is going to be warp 3. And again, unchecking ignore z-axes. And then we'll go ahead and just click on save. And we'll actually, we'll start with these 2 for right now. We'll hook into the wall vault after. Now, there's one other thing that I actually almost forgot to do. Before we get into actually adding these animations in, we want to make sure we also add a notify, because there's this element in the system that sets the character to flying, sets certain other character-based movement elements to needed values. But in order to ensure everything gets reset by the time the action ends, there is a notify that's built into the system. So I've got the first vault montage here, the one that we just worked on here, the standard monkey vault. And we're just going to go to the notifies section here, right click, add notify, and you'll see reset parkour action right here at the bottom. We're just going to line this up right there. And we're going to want to do this on both actions here. So we're going to open up the roll vault here as well and do the same thing. Kind of go like where it's ending, right click, add notify, and we're going to click on the reset parkour action. Now, there is one thing to keep in mind with this particular notify. It is not just a reset, there is also options inside of the details panel as well. So once you add it in, you want to go up and make sure that you're setting the proper movement mode that it's supposed to enter. So certain animations, you might enter a falling state. Certain animations, you might actually land on the ground. And to be able to ensure that the character enters the proper movement mode, you want to set this up here. So this one, he's landing on the ground, so instead of falling, we're going to set it to walking. And we're going to set that on both here, actually. So we're going to go with the monkey vault here. And we're going to go right here and set the movement mode to walking. So now we have our motion warp windows and our notifies in place for those 2 actions. So we can go ahead and save that. And we're going to go back to our character blueprint now. So third person blueprints, BP third person character. And now here in the event vault action, in the select here, we can go ahead and add those montages we made. So under the short distance vault, it's going to be the monkey vault. And the long distance vault, it's going to be the roll vault. Now we do also need to enable these actions in the parkour system before they will work. So we're going to go into the dynamic parkour trace system here. And under the settings, ground action settings, under vault action settings, allowed actions, make sure short distance and long distance vault is selected. Now, we are also not going to be working with the modifiers in this particular video. We're going to be covering modifiers in the next one, but for right now, I'm going to show you how to be able to get things set up without using the sprint or slide modifier. So we're going to go down to where it says action modifications settings, and you're going to see sprint and slide modifier here. So we're going to open up the sprint modifier first. I'll kind of expand this here, and you'll see defaulted actions if false. If we open this up here, you're going to see that there's a list of actions that you can select for it to do by default. Because a lot of these, what's going to happen if you're using the sprint input is that it's going to select these actions dynamically based off of if sprinting is true or not true. However, to ensure that you still have full access to every action within the actual system overall, you can go ahead and select certain default action types. So under the medium height platform here, we have Mantle. We're going to set it to long distance vault instead. Now, this doesn't mean that it's never going to select a mantle. It just means that it's not going to allow a dynamic selection of the long distance vault. If it's within the distance allowed, then it's going to perform that action. However, if it's beyond that distance or the other side is blocked, then it's going to choose mantle instead if it's allowed. And when I say allowed, every single action type, if you go into ground action settings, and this goes for climb actions as well, but I don't want to overflood with too much information. Everything has an allowed action section. So you can select exactly what actions you want to have allowed and not allowed, and everything is just disabled by default. So you can just select the ones you want and go from there. But for right now, we're just going to go ahead and set the long distance vault as the medium height platform default action type. And we don't really need to mess with the slide modifier right now, so we'll just keep that off. And we're not going to be using the jump input. So what we're going to need to do, though, is we're going to need to make a quick input to be able to use to actually call the trace. So we're going to type keyboard event E. Now you can use any input you want. And again, we are going to be covering the use jump input in the next video. But as I said, we're not covering modifiers in this one. We're just looking at the absolute baseline setup. Now, what we're going to do off of the pressed here is we're going to grab the dynamic parkour trace system. And we're also going to grab the character movement here. Now, we want to get a few things here. Now, we're going to pull off the dynamic parkour trace system, and we're going to get the active climb style. Essentially, what this is just a value that's telling the system whether you are or are not currently in a climbing type of behavior. So what we're going to do is pull off of this, and we're going to see enum equal, and if it's equal to none, and then we're going to take off the character movement and type in falling, and get the is falling nav movement here. Now off the is falling, we're just going to get a not boolean, and then we're just going to get an and bool and hook both of these up. So it's basically just going to make sure that the character is not currently falling and the active climb style is equal to none. So we're just going to go ahead and add a branch off of pressed, hook this up just like this. Now there is one thing to note, and we can do this now, is that this is going to block climbing for the moment. So what we're going to do is take the active climb style here and do kind of reverse where see if it's not equal to none. And essentially what this will do, we can add an or boolean, is make it so that way even though you might not be on the ground, you're still going to be allowed to do the input for climbing type actions. So we'll plug that in right there, and that'll be allowing all of the input to happen, but without actually doing vaulting and stuff like that while the character is off the ground. Now we're just going to grab a reference to the dynamic parkour trace system here. Just grab, highlight it, and Control D. And then pull off and execute trace. And then plug it off of true, just like this. And then we'll compile and save. So now we have everything set up, but we now need to kind of put some objects in here for our character to vault over. So I'm just going to grab a couple of cubes here. And we'll just make this a little wider. A little more narrow, kind of more like a vaulting type object here. And we'll put it in just like so. Now if I go ahead and click on play, and then I press E, you can see that he does the vault action. And I can raise this up a little bit, and do it again. You can see that he adjusts himself into the height and make sure that he gets perfectly aligned. every single time. Now there is a little bit of a stop when he gets back into the movement mode of walking, but you can use blend outs and things like that to be able to make this a little bit smoother. But overall, the functionality is pretty much the same. Now, the one thing I want to point out, and this is where I was going to want to talk about the warp points just a little bit before we move into the next actions. So if we go into the character blueprint here and go into the dynamic parkour trace system, over on the details panel here, if you look under miscellaneous overrides, we want to check the show debug spheres and then compile and save, and then we'll click on play. Now, what's going to happen is that when we do the action type, you're going to see that there's debug spheres showing on the screen. Now, these all represent different things based off of what the actual action type is. But for the most part, green is going to be a landing location, yellow is going to be the frontal object's height, blue is going to be the top, opposite side or the depth, and red is going to be kind of like miscellaneous, depending on what the action type is. It's either a side wall or the frontal area on the character, as you can see there. Now, just to give you another demonstration, if I go ahead and make this just a little bit longer, so this way it'll do the other vault. Whoops, wrong button. There we go. Object was just a little too long, that's all. So if I go ahead and do this now, you'll see that he goes from point A to point B. Probably need to adjust that the warp point just a little bit there. So and this is kind of one of the fine-tuning parts of the system, because motion warping can be a little bit little finicky sometimes, but as long as you're willing to work with it, it'll generally treat you pretty well. So we're going to kind of make sure that he's right about here. It's probably just a little too close to the end. So let's see how that looks if we do it now. Yeah, it's a little bit better. The animation does have a little bit of an offset on the pelvis too, so there's only so much I can do about that. Let's see how this looks. There we go. It's much better. So you can see that now that he's going across. So the one thing I want to point out with these, though, is you can see the blue here on this one is the opposite side. Yellow is the kind of frontal height, and green is that depth point. Yellow is warp 1, blue warp 2, green warp 3. So if we look at the roll vault montage here, we can see that we named this one warp 1, which is where we're having him get to the height point. Warp 2, where he's rolling across and getting to the opposite side. And then warp 3, where we want to have him kind of go down and land. And then we're resetting the action and setting the movement mode to walking. You can also set movement mode to falling and cut it a little short of the actual land itself. Sometimes that does help with certain actions like this. See if that actually fixes yeah, that pretty much fixed it completely. So, certain times, the animation might require you to cut it a little bit short, so this way it doesn't get that offset jitter. But as you can see, though, it still is able to do what it needs to do. Now, if you're ever curious about information about the warp points themselves, if we go into the parkour system itself in the component section of the character, under the action offset section here, if you just open up any one, it doesn't really matter. They're all with the same information. But if you look at it, this entire thing is going to tell you exactly what the warp points are used for, what the overall usage is for each action type, certain general rules of thumb, and they're different for each action type or each warp. So this will let you know exactly what's going on, and then you can use the show debug spheres to be able to correlate, because as you can see, if we look at the descriptions of these, you can see warp 1 yellow, warp 2 blue, warp 3 green, and warp 4 red. So this is how you can be able to correlate what the locations are, what they mean, and then again, more information by highlighting over them. Now, to be able to modify certain things, certain action types do have their own menu. So while we're in here, we're going to go ahead and open up the ground action settings, then the vault actions, and you're going to see that there's the max distance for long distance vault. So if I set this to example to 150 rather than the 340 that it was before, and then I click on play, you're going to see the action is actually not going to take place. And the reason is because the distance from this side to this side is greater than 150. But if I, let's say, narrow it down to something like this, and then I try to do it, you can see that there, it now is able to perform the action. So it's really just all about fine-tuning it to what you want, because, that was a nice smooth vault over. It makes it so it doesn't look as exaggerated. So it really just depends on the look that you're going for, and you can use a lot of the settings in here to define exactly that. All right, so now that we have a little bit more understanding about warp points, at least, I'm sure you'll get more as time goes on. But again, there's always that that way to be able to get the information about them if you ever get confused. Let's go ahead and add the last vault type action, which is the wall vault. So we're going to go to our tutorial assets folder, animations, vault, and then montages. And then we'll pull up the wall monkey vault. Now, this is one of the instances where we're going to use warp 4 to be able to kind of adjust our character as he's running towards the wall and climbing up it a little bit. So we're going to add a new notify track, right click, add notify state, and we're going to do the standard motion warp window. Whoops, add the wrong one. Motion warping. And then we're going to kind of find where it is that he kind of starts going up the wall, like kind of where he's supposed to be at the wall's height. Which is going to be under the wall's height, but aligned with the wall's surface, I'm sorry. Which is going to be right about here. And then we're going to go and right click, add notify state again, motion warping. And this time we're going to go ahead and make it so that way it's right about there. All right, so that one's going to be kind of when he raises himself up. Now we're going to let the root motion of the animation carry it from here to here. And then we're going to go add notify state, motion warping, and find where he kind of enters his landing spot, which is going to be right about there. And then we'll put that there. And this way our warp window is now defined for the landing spot. So for the first window here, if we click on it to highlight it, go to the root motion controller under warp target name, and then warp 1 as the name. Make sure to uncheck ignore Z axes. I apologize. This one's actually supposed to be warp 4. I'm sorry, not warp 1. The next one here is going to be warp 1. So we're going to go into the root motion modifier again and warp 1. This is on the second one here. So this is the one where it's kind of like going up to the ledge area before he vaults over it. And then we're going to uncheck the ignore Z axes. And then the last one here is going to be that warp 3 for that landing position. So we're going to go ignore Z axes again. And we're going to go ahead and just click on save and make sure we add our notify in. So we're going to right click, add notify, and go down to where it says reset parkour action. Make sure this is lined up, somewhat like that. Now we'll just go ahead and compile and save, or I guess save realistically, and go back to our character blueprint. Now from here we can go ahead and just add in the wall vault. So if we go to the wall vault over in the list here, you'll see wall monkey vault right there. Now we also want to make sure to select this as an available action. So we're going to go back to our parkour system here, allowed actions under the ground action settings for vault actions, and make sure wall vault is checked. Compile and save. So now from here, what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and just kind of make this guy a little bit smaller, more of a vaulting type object. And we're going to bring him up a little bit so he's a little taller, more of like a wall, something like this. So now if I go up to this here, you're going to see he does the wall vault type action. However, you can see like there's a little bit of an offset to where he goes. And that's just because of the way that I had set up these for specifically the wall vaults is that I have allowed for a bit of an offset position to be used. So we're going to change this from warp 1 to warp 2, and this is the middle point here. Now, the reason why we're changing it to warp 2 is because, again, I forgot that I used warp 1 as the offset position. So we're going to go from warp 4 here in the beginning to then warp 2. And then to warp 3. So now if we go ahead and we do this action, you can see that he gets a lot closer to the top. He goes a little bit, higher up than you might want. You can always adjust that however you feel you need to. We're also going to, under the wall vault here, if we go under the blend options, under blend out, we're going to change this from 0.25 to 0.1. Just because the animation kind of blends out a little too quickly, so it's a little rough on the way it blends. You can see that's a little bit better. Obviously, I need some sort of like landing animation. Now, just to show you what the warp 1 point would be for, is if you notice when I go over the wall here, the specific animation, when he grabs at the wall, it's not exactly height proper. So it's kind of a bit of an offset at the start of the animation. I mean, it doesn't look terrible, but it doesn't look, that nice fine-tuned element that you might want. So if that is something that you're looking for, what you can do instead is look for right about where he posts onto this, the object. And then instead of using warp 2 right out the gate, we're going to go add notify state motion warping. And we're going to go ahead and add warp 1 as sort of the middle point here. So warp target name, warp 1. Ignore Z axes, and then click on play. And you'll see that there's going to be a big difference between, you can see that now he's up a lot higher, kind of goes up and shoots up. So, we probably need to smooth that out just a little bit. I'm just going to add the track here. So we're going to look for right around where he kind of starts to do the pivot downwards. And we're going to align this just like this. And this is where, like, if you want the fine-tuned element, I'm just showing you this because it does take a little bit of patience. But you can see that now he grabs a lot closer to the ledge. And then he kind of vaults himself over. And it's a lot smoother of an action. It's the same animation, but the start and end positions during the actual vault are a lot smoother. So you can choose however you want to set this up, but this is one of those instances where we are using all 4 warp points. We're starting with the closest point to the wall, then we're going up to kind of like the adjustment of the height, then we're going to go to the second height adjustment, and then we're going to go into the kind of landing or end point position. So we're going to go ahead and save that. And now if we go ahead and we'll add a couple of, let's go ahead and delete some of these playground elements here. So I'll put that in there, and then I'll take this one, and I'll bring it down a little bit, and then I'll put this one in here, and then I'll just make it a little bit longer, so that way it's kind of proper height. So now we can go ahead and we can do the wall vault here, we can do the medium vault here, and we've got that nice little row vault here. So now we've got the vault set up. So the last thing that we're going to do is just set up the mantles to be able to kind of make it so that way our character is able to not only vault on things, but also can mantle things. So we're just going to need to go ahead and start grabbing the mantle animations. A lot of the setup is going to be pretty much the same, but again, we're setting up every action. So we're going to go to our Parkour animations folder here, animations, UE4 skeleton, and we're going to look for, I believe there's some mantles in here. I think they're under the vaults. Here we go, vault on. And then we're going to go ahead and take the A monkey on, and we're going to put this on the in the animations folder here, just like what we've been doing before. And then we're also going to go back to the wall vault here. You're going to see wall vault on, and then we have the same thing. We can get the wall monkey vault on. So we're going to take this, put this in the animations folder here as well. And this way, now we have these two. So what we're going to do before we put them into like an actual mantle folder, we're just going to go ahead and right click and replace the skeleton, and I'm going to set it to the retarget skeleton. So this way they're actually using my standard character skeleton, and then we'll make a new folder called Mantle. And then we'll just go ahead and move these, didn't mean to open that, move these both into here. And then with them both highlighted, right click, and then asset actions, and bulk edit via property matrix. Now we're going to do the same thing that we did before, where we're going to go root motion and enable root motion. This way, all the animations are using root motion as they're supposed to. And then we're going to make a new folder and call it montages. Now, from here, what we're going to do is just get these both highlighted, right click, and then create and in montage, highlight them both, and we're going to move them to the montage folder, just like so. So we're going to work on the standard medium mantle first. So it's this one here. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull it back and do kind of like what we've been doing before, where we're going to right click, add notify state, motion warping, and we're going to look for where he kind of starts getting up to right about the area, maybe something like right about here. And then we're going to pull it to that point, and then we're going to name this warp 1. And then just make sure that, as always, we ignore z-axis here. Now, with the mantles, there is, just like with the vaults, there's additional warp locations, but we're going to do a basic first, just so that way I can show you. So then right about here is where he's going to land, so we'll go ahead and just go add notify state, motion warping, and we'll kind of do like right about here, something like that, and then we'll push it to where he gets his landing point, right about there. So we'll save that. Now we do have to make sure to name these points, so we'll take this one, and we'll go warp 3, and ignore z-axis, uncheck. Sorry if you can hear the motorcycles outside. Alright, so now from here we're just going to add the notify, so add notify, and reset parkour action at the end, so that we can save that. So we're going to go and open up the next one here, the wall monkey on montage, and we're going to do pretty much the same thing. We're just going to go track, add notify track, right click, add notify state, motion warping, pull it to the beginning. Now one thing is that just like with the wall vault, is that we can use warp 4 to be able to align him to the wall position before he kind of gets up and pulls himself up to the ledge. So we're going to set that one for warp 4, and then we're going to add another motion warp window, and we're going to look for where he kind of pulls himself up, something like this. And then we'll set this for right now to warp 2, And then we're going to add another notify, motion warping, and we're going to look for where he gets to his land point, which is right about here. And then we're going to set this to warp 3. Again, warp 3 being the land point, warp 2 being the kind of like the height adjustment point on vaulting and mantle actions. Unless you're referring to the long distance vault, in which point it's kind of like the overall point to be able to get over an object. But we'll just go ahead and make sure to add notify and reset parkour action. And then we'll click on save. We got to make sure to name the last point here. Or is it the first one? It's the first one. So we're going to make sure to name this warp 4 and make sure to uncheck ignore z-axes. I was going to make sure to do it on these because I did not. Perfect. All right, so now what we can do is open up our character blueprint. So it's third person for me, it's third person blueprints and BP third person character. Now, because we're adding a different set of actions, we're no longer going to use the event for vault action. We're actually going to go back to the interfaces section under the my blueprints. And then under action events, we're now going to add the mantle action. So it will add a whole new set of options here. So we're just going to drag this over to the side. I'm just going to put this more over here. All right, now what we're going to do is we're just going to grab this play montage node. We're going to highlight it in the mesh component here, and then just Control D to duplicate it. This way we don't have to, bring it out, bring a meshing component and connect everything. It's already all there for us. So now we're just going to pull off the montage to play and get a select node here just like this and plug the enumeration for the mantle action type into the index. Now you can see here we have the medium height mantle and the wall height mantle as options. So we're going to go ahead and put those on. So we get the medium height mantle, which is the monkey on, and the wall height mantle, which is the monkey wall on. Let's see, this one right here. Perfect. So now we also, just like with the vaults, need to ensure we enable mantling as an option for the system. So we're going to just collapse the vault section here. And under the dynamic parkour trace systems details panel here, we're going to go to ground action settings, and then under mantle action settings, allowed mantle actions, and make sure both of these are set to true. And then compile and save. Now, one thing I actually almost forgot to do was to make sure to set the notifies properly on the mantle actions. So we're going to open up the mantle actions really quickly, animations, mantle, montages, because I need to make sure that this is going to be set to walking rather than falling, because otherwise it'll have a little bit of a jitter when he actually lands, because we're having him stop when he actually, his feet are on the ground. So now with both of those set to walking, this should be exactly what we need here. We'll just go ahead and save everything here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a little bit wider, so this way it's something that he can actually mantle on. And the same thing here, so this way, again, it's something he can mantle on. Now, while playing in the editor here, if I press E, you can see that he does, the mantle type action. So as you can see, the effect of the mantle isn't quite perfect. So what we can do is we're going to open up the mantle here for the monkey on montage, and we're going to kind of try to fine tune these a little bit better. So we're going to look at where he kind of reaches the ledge, which is going to be right about here. So we're going to move that back. And maybe from there to there is when he'll start moving to his landing position. And then we'll go ahead and just kind of move forward, and we'll cut it back a few frames on the warp window here. And then we'll click save, and we'll try it now. So it's a little bit better. Now, as you can see here, it is a little bit high though. So, maybe we can raise this up a little bit, possibly. Let's go ahead and I'm going to show you how to be able to use the offsets. So if we open up the third person blueprints BP third person character, go to the dynamic parkour trace system, and this time we're going to open up the action offsets here. And we're going to go down to where it says mantle location offsets, medium height mantle, and warp 1. Now you'll see the up/down right now is just set to 20, so it's raising it up higher by a slight margin. If we set this to, let's say, -50, and then compile and save, hit play. Whoops, hit the wrong button. You'll see that he now starts lower. He's more kind of aligned to that ledge point a little bit better to be able to pull himself up onto the actual point where he lands. So these are kind of where you can define a lot of different stuff about the overall character, and the animation and the way things move are going to be through these offsets. Each one of these is going to change the location based off of actor position, or if it's a climbing type, it's going to use the normal. But we're going to get into that when we get into climbing. But for all ground actions, Just think of it like the actor's forward position or up vector or right vector, right? If you're going to the right, it's a positive value. If you're going left, if it's a negative value. If you're going, up or down, up is positive, down is negative, forward and back, same thing. Forward is positive, back is negative. So that's the way that these work, is that they're adjusting the default position. So, and if you're curious about what the default locations are, let's go ahead under the miscellaneous overrides here. We're going to override motion warp and action output settings, because with this is going to basically just stop all montage execution. So this way you can kind of debug and see how things are operating. Now we're also going to make sure to check the use default locations. So if we compile and save, click play, you're going to see that, for example, on this action here, that we have just the positions, no offsets. It hasn't been pushed back or pushed down. If I go here, you can see the same thing. It's just getting the height, the depth, and then kind of like a forward landing position, and then the first point that it hits the object on, which is the red marker. However, if I go ahead and open up the character blueprint and just disable the use default locations, and then click on play and do the same exact thing, you'll notice that each of these has, or at least the warp 1 and warp 3 have a bit of an offset to them. Same thing with the vault action here and the mantle action here. So always remember that you can modify these through the action offset settings whenever you need. And again, just to reiterate, these all have their own descriptions. Now let's go ahead and check the wall mantle here, and we'll see how this is looking. So we're going to go ahead and climb up. Oh, that's right. We still got the disable here. So we're going to uncheck the override motion warp option there. And then now if we click play and we go up to this, you'll see that he climbs up to the top of the object and kind of lands exactly where he's supposed to. So if you'll notice here, there's warp 1, the height, the yellow point, which is a little bit lower. Warp 2, which is the kind of like the highest point there. These can be used to offset if your animation kind of does a bit of a stop and then kind of raises up. Like it's not as fluid as this. You can use these locations to be able to help offset the locations, because remember, with motion warping, those windows that we're defining is how long it takes to get from point A to point B, and then when you make a new window, it's another point A to point B. So if your animation has a bit of a stall out or something in it that would cause it to be needing an additional point to hold it in place and then raise it up again, you can use the additional warp 2 point to be able to do this. Now, one thing I also want to point out is that our original setup here, we did set under these sprint modifications. If we open that up here, we did set the defaulted action to use if false is the long distance vault. However, the reason why the mantle action is being taken is because the vault distance, the object here exceeds that distance. So this is where the mantle is going to override if it's an allowed action. But realistically, it's not going to actually just force it and not allow mantle if you do allow it. So this is a way that you can allow both of them to work. But if you just set mantle, long distance vault will never be taken. So this is something to keep in mind. But that's really it for the vaulting and mantling, the initial setup. So we've got now the ability to, mantle on top of objects. We can kind of vault over things of wall vault or normal vault. We can mantle on top of higher objects. So now in the next video, we're going to be going over some of the modifications and setting up the sprint modifier and the slide modifier. So I hope you guys are excited. We're going to be getting every single part of this system covered. So it's going to be, longer videos, probably going to be a lot of information. But this should help clarify a lot of confusion that people are having, just because I know it's a very extensive system. So hope to see you guys in the next one. That's going to close it out for now. But stay tuned, and as always, stay animated.